Kate Falcho, welcome to Irish Granny Helen. It's still time for our Saturday book. We're on video number 2 of The Rule of Crime and Me, an intimate view of Anne Rule shared by her friend of 30 years, Anne Jaeger. And really getting into this, and we were just talking about Ted Bundy. So if you haven't watched video number 1, you should watch video number 1. This is video number 2. Did I do that? Video number 2, chapter 11, House Rules. So Anne Jaeger, the author of the book, we have 2 authors named Anne. I'm eternally confused, but Jaeger is the author of the book we're reading about, Anne Rule. She met with Anne Rule's cousin Jim recently in Michigan. She called him and his wife salt of the earth people. He remembered picking Anne up at the airport for an interview the first time he'd seen her since he was a child. He came with his parents in 1962 to the Seattle World's Fair. I think she was living there. And she was an adult with children, and her cousin was still a little boy. So this is the first time they've seen each other since that visit. He pretended to be a well-known name, the owner of a porn shop. So coming from Michigan, she was familiar with these personalities, right? She recognized the name. So she shows up. He's picking her up at the airport, and she hasn't seen him since he was about 9 or 10. And he introduced himself to her as this guy who was famous for owning a porn shop. And she immediately knew it was her cousin. She gave him a hard time. It was a big joke. She was very gracious. He noticed how many family traits they shared. They were really quite similar. Anne reciprocated and had her cousin's wife come to her writer's cottage on Puget Sound, which was adjacent to her house. Nice little guest place. It was actually a money pit that she had to pay $400,000 for damage from mudslides over the years. So for a very, 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 very long time, even after she became a hugely successful author, she lived humbly. She lived in a tract house that she had lived in for decades. She just drove a clunker of a car. She shopped at Goodwill. She was not a pretentious person. But eventually she started to get worried about notoriety, and she found a home to buy that was on the water and had no access from the water side. And to get to the house from the street, you had to go, I don't know if it was up and then down, or if it was just down, and kind of an inaccessible place, staircases to get there. So it was off the beaten path. It wasn't easy to access. If you had a dog or an alarm system, you had about, I'm exaggerating, 2 hours warning that somebody was coming that you hadn't invited. So she felt more secure there, but it wasn't fancy. It was charming. And the real selling point was there was the house, which was not a huge house, not a mansion, not an estate, just a house. Because it was on the water, it cost more than normal people could afford, but it wasn't fancy. And it had a little tiny shack that she called her writer's cottage, but she used it for guests. Because the house itself only had 2 bedrooms, I think. Anyway, it cost her a fortune to repair mudslides. I guess she had to go downstairs. It was her big purchase as a successful millionaire writer. And Jaeger says it really was not what you would expect given her enormous financial success. It was beachfront, therefore expensive, but Anne couldn't even let them sit outside because there were mosquitoes because of the water. She had a one-eyed stray cat she adopted. She was really into animals. criminals. Chapter 12, Rule Rising. So she had written 35 books. Every single one of them got on the New York Times bestseller list. Can you imagine? They made 17 television movies from her books. And she avoided controversy. She just led this really low-key life. She didn't want to be in the eye of the media. She became a very popular mentor for other writers. But she did become a target of jealousy. She was so successful that it rankled some people. She didn't rub it in, but you know how people are. So she became close friends with a fellow true crime writer, Catherine Casey, who had written 19 books. She could relate. Both had an empathetic perspective on their genre. They paid attention to the victims and the families. And they were meticulous researchers. They looked at personality traits, psychopaths, often. And they believed that you could see these traits early in life, and they would look at the back story, the life of the criminals that they were investigating. She said it wasn't always easy to tell at first glance. It's something she discovered that the experts know. There's a facade, you know, the mask of sanity. And as a researcher, she did the work. She went to all the trials. She met as many family members as she could. She didn't just take the story out of Wikipedia, which is what I would do. You know, I'm not going to go out there and burn shoe leather, as they put it, interviewing people. But her books, I mean, they were exhaustively interviewed. At the beginning of her career, she felt guilty about making money from other people's misfortunes. This is the kind of ethical person she was. How many people who are famous even think this way? She's like, oh my God, I wrote about this horrible murder and I made a fortune off of it. I feel really badly about that. So she went to a psychologist, started paying a therapist to try to justify what she was doing. And the therapist told her, look, what matters is how you feel about people. She told her that all sorts of people make money from other people's sad lives. Lawyers, doctors, journalists. I mean, it's just kind of how capitalism works. And you're not causing grief and sorrow and pain. You're not sensationalizing this stuff. And you're actually doing a favor to people because you're helping us understand. So the therapist was able to help her to come to peace with it. But she was conflicted about her success. She admitted that the tragic stories really hit her emotionally. She was careful not to re-victimize the families. Her work transformed the true crime genre. She prioritized the lives of the people involved. She wasn't about the blood and guts. She especially prioritized the women. She's the first one to start writing about family violence and that kind of thing. She even omitted disturbing details of crimes and instead put the emphasis on the women's hopes and dreams, their relationships, the emotional impact on the victims and on the families. And she also kept the audience in mind. She decided she didn't want to be gory. She wasn't going to focus on that. She would not use horrible crime scene photos in her books. She was against gratuitous violence. She felt that Truman Capote had been too sympathetic to the killers in cold blood. She provided a balance and an empathy for the victims. She got a lot of snark from writer Jack Olson. I can't remember what it is he wrote. I think he wrote The Onion Field, but he wrote something else I really liked. Did he write Sun? You're just give me a second because I have an interesting tidbit here to share. If I can find who wrote this book. Yes, he did. Okay, let me read you this little aside. We're going to deviate from our Saturday book here for 2 minutes. So he wrote the book Sun. In 1983, he wrote it. It was a true crime book. It details the tragic events following the arrest of a young man named Fred Coe. And Fred Coe was finally identified and arrested for a series of non-consensual encounters with strange women he didn't know, in eastern Washington state in a town called Spokane. The book explores the revenge and murder that ensued after Coe's arrest. It was nominated for an Edgar Award. It's called Son. I read this book, and this book is chilling. It's called Son because that's what his mother called him. Into his late 20s, he was Son. That was like instead of a name. And there's a whole story of revenge that's absolutely unbelievable. It's no spoiler he went to prison. Here's the spoiler. I just read this the other day. His name caught my eye. I went, oh, I read that book. I recognize that guy's name. It was in the national news. He has served time in prison ever since, and he's in his, I think he's in his 80s. He's in his late 70s anyway, and he's in poor health. And they have let him out of prison. He's in a halfway house because they don't want to pay, I think, for his medical care. So he's out of prison. I found that shocking. He attacked so many. And the story of what he did, really creepy, really sinister. So you might want to look up Fred Coe, C-O-E. Anyway, Jack Olson wrote this great book that won all kinds of awards about it. So I guess that they were a little bit competing, and he was a little bit envious, maybe. But he was snarky about her, and she didn't respond to any of it. Privately, she thought it was misogyny, that crime was seen to be a male-dominated genre, that it should remain that way. And so she was one of the few women writing true crime. She was criticized for writing about Ted Bundy because she knew him. And some of the guys were like, well, that's not fair. What they said was, that's not very ethical. But if you knew a serial killer, wouldn't you write about it? I mean, I would. They told her, oh, you're too close. You don't have perspective. But she had here's the interesting thing. She had gotten a contract to write a book before they knew who he was. This anonymous person they knew was committing all these crimes, and I guess they were able to link them. They couldn't figure out who this serial killer was. And they hired her to write about this unknown serial killer. She was horrified when she put two and two together. She did the right thing right away. As soon as her suspicion grew, she went immediately to the police, and she fully admitted publicly later that, yeah, it was very profitable to have a friendship with a serial killer who became infamous. Yes, I acknowledge that. But she was approached by the families of the victims, and she was encouraged to write about the victims. And because she was so good at centering the victims in her books. So when she was having self-doubt and she was listening to these guys telling her, oh, well, that's no fair. You knew him. You shouldn't write about him. The family said, oh, no, we want you to write about them. So then she wrote, Every Breath You Take. Oh, I had that downstairs. I was going to bring it up. I should have. Every Breath You Take, a story of obsession, revenge, and murder is an example. The victim, Sheila Blackthorne Belushi, was killed, and she had told her sister before she was killed, if anything ever happens to me, promise that you will see there's an investigation and find Anne Rule and ask her to write my story. And they went to her and said, will you write the story of our murdered sister? And did. And in the dedication, it says, this book is for Sheila. I owe her a voice when she no longer has hers. I just thought that was beautiful. That made me tear up. Okay, so she went to the police. She told them what her suspicions were. She still gave him the benefit of the doubt. She went to the first hearing, and I don't think I wrote this down, but when they actually indicted him, she went out into the hallway and threw up. She couldn't believe it. And she's this expert, that's incredible. Chapter 13, Rules of Generosity. Anne loved Value Village. Value Village is a thrift shop. I don't know exactly how far the range of it is, but it's a thrift shop, but it's a little bit a nicer thrift shop. She wasn't a big spender on herself. She lived very simply. She was a child of the Depression. She was young during the Depression, and that traumatized a lot of people, I think. Okay, there's this TV guy named Peter Van Sant, tall blonde guy, and he was Anne's secret lifelong crush. She just loved him, and then got to meet him because she, was an author. And he spoke at her memorial. He talked about the day that he interviewed Anne. He was given the job to go interview her for his channel or show or whoever it was he was writing for. He got to be nationally known because I recognize his face. I don't know what show he's on, but this is before he was real famous. So he wanted to interview Anne, and he was coming to her house, and he thought that he was in the wrong place. So he pulls up in front of this address, and he said, this is like this plain ranch style house in this plain neighborhood. And he, at that point, had interviewed a lot of famous people. So he was very used to pulling up to big estates and fancy mansions and expensive properties. He could not believe he had the right house. He said she was wealthy. She was the rock star of true crime books. And here she's living this very down-to-earth life in a very old place she'd lived in for a very long time, suburban split-level ranch-style house. And it reminded Van Sant of the home that he grew up in. He grew up in the same area, I guess. And she still had all of her old furniture from when she was first married. And just things were not important to her. And it was really apparent when he first met her. So he was asked, well, so what was important to her? What did she talk about? And he said, oh, she talked constantly about her children. She reminisced about buying misshapen hot dogs on discount when she was first a single mom, and she was trying to scrape together an income from writing, and she was raising these children alone. And she would go to the discount counter at the grocery store. They had hot dogs that didn't go through the process properly, and they were shaped weird. There's nothing wrong with them, but they just looked funny, and she would buy them. And so she would cut them up and put them into chili or whatever. And they seemed to have been eaten, but one day later on, she found a bunch of them hidden under the couch. She was generous with her time for her fans. She loved her. Let me humble brag. I could own, this is the very last book the store had. I wanted a hardback. I would have coughed up the money, but they didn't have any. And this is For Helen, All the Best, Anne Rule, my most precious possession. So she was generous with her fans. She would not leave a book signing until every single person who showed up got their book signed. And one day at a Fred Meyer store near Seattle, the clerk was upset. Oh, this is a great story. So she's checking out her groceries, and the clerk was visibly shaky. And Anne asked her, what's wrong with you? This is a young girl. And she said, my car just died in the parking lot, and I can't pay my rent already. And I need diapers, and I don't know what to do. I don't know what I'm going to do. And she hadn't intended to offer this, but Anne pried. What's wrong with you? Can you talk? Tell me. And so right there at the cash register, Anne paid her groceries. And then she wrote this young woman a check for $10,000. And she did this at least a half a dozen times. The author, Jaeger, knew her very well. And she said that she would quietly do this for people, buy them a car, give them $10,000, people who genuinely needed it. Her son had a girlfriend, and the girlfriend's car died. And she was really stressed out about it because she needed a car to get to work. So Anne and her son conspired this little plan, and they picked her up. I don't know where she was. They picked her up to give her a ride, and they're driving down the street, and then suddenly on this random street, they pull over, and the girlfriend says, "What are you doing? I probably have to get to work." And she hands her keys, and there's this beautiful brand new car parked at the side of the road. They bought her this car. Just such a nice person. So she remained close to the girlfriend. She dedicated some books to the girlfriend long after her son broke up with her. She donated to friends and to families and to their causes. She donated to animal shelters. Her own dog was, as Jaeger here, the author, describes it, sweet and fat and Anne's closest friend. Anne loved her cats. Her last cat survived her and went on to live with Anne's daughter, Leslie, after Anne died. Her daughter, in Anne's honor, created her own little family-run animal shelter. Anne loved gardening, and even into her 80s, in a wheelchair, the author, Jaeger, would go to her house and spend a few days and help her create and maintain a garden of potted plants that were tall enough for her to work on from her wheelchair on her deck. She gave away signed copies of her books very many times. She even had fans who couldn't make her appearances. She'd have them come to her house and pick up signed copies. She also supported charities for children who had been through trauma, and she supported charities for homeless children. She did a lot of charitable work, and she never wanted anybody to know about it. And this is what she said. The charities for homeless children, somebody thanked her once, and she said, "Look, we have to take care of the babies. Otherwise, we're growing the sadistic sociopath a decade down the line. Every child deserves a forever home, but in the meantime, Anne wanted to improve their quality of life. She gave $5,000 a month to the hometown food bank for years and years and years. They once held a thank you lunch, and 75 people showed up at a restaurant near her home to honor her for the $5,000 she gave. She supported women's shelters. When Anne was a kid, her family often took in wayward boys, and Anne continued to do that. Throughout her whole entire life, she opened her home to young men who were in trouble and needed a place to live, and a number of them spoke at her memorial. She also paid for friends' facelifts. I think that's great. She kept a website. She didn't care about it, but she, for friends who really wanted one, she paid for it. She kept a website, and she communicated with guests on the website, but occasionally she got taken advantage of. So once somebody claimed that this person claimed that she needed money for cancer treatment, and Anne gave her a lot of money and then found out that it was a big scam. And Anne's reaction was she was disappointed with herself for falling for it. She had to be reminded that despite the evil that she wrote about for decades, she still had a good heart, and she wasn't jaded, and anybody can be fooled. She was a very disciplined writer. She wrote 7 days a week. This reminds me of Stephen King. Stephen King is an extremely disciplined writer. Takes the hard work to get the success. She rarely took a break of more than a day. She had working vacations to travel to trials. Those were her only vacations. She made tons of money, but she drove a 1991 Toyota Celica. She had a small pickup as well that she used for gardening and moving stuff to the dump and that kind of thing. She did buy a nice house finally on the Sound, Puget Sound, in the 1990s, which I mentioned earlier. It was accessible. Oh, I forgot this. It wasn't a stairway. It was a tram. It was only accessible by the tram. You couldn't get to the house without calling the tram up. That's why it was so particularly security conscious. And then, of course, there was the little extra cottage. She read the National Enquirer every day. And when I read this, I thought I knew that she and I were kindred spirits. I didn't have a TV for a very long time, about 20 years. And the only way I stayed in touch with what was going on in the world, because I had a house full of small children, it was hard. And I really wasn't in touch with popular culture, but I'd go to the grocery store, and on purpose, I would get into the longest line at the grocery store so that I could have time to read the National Enquirer while I stood in line. And then, people would give me subscriptions to the Weekly World News and the Globe and the National Enquirer. They were hilarious. I would have them on my coffee table downstairs, and my friends would come over. My friends were all, well educated. They'd come over and they go, how can you read that garbage? But every single one of them sat and read that garbage. When I'd go into the kitchen to make coffee, to catch them reading the National Enquirer. So Anne Rule loved the National Enquirer and the other tabloids, and she read them every day. She said they often got the stories earlier than the legitimate news because they paid to get the stories. They were her favorite newspapers. So how about that? Chapter 14, Hidden Truths. May 19th. This is the story of Diane Downs, which Denise and I have covered in Psychics and Psychos, which we're still desperately working on. Here is the book that she wrote about that. Pay attention to the brass unicorn. This is a harrowing story. Let me see if I don't remember if there are pictures in here. Oh, of course there are. Let me see. Here's a picture of Diane Downs a long time ago, right after, she'd committed her crime. It's unbelievable. She had 3 children, and one night on a rural road in Oregon, she killed them. Well, she shot at them. One died. Two were injured. One was paralyzed, and one had a terrible head injury and took a very long time to get better. She described a disheveled, shaggy-haired man who ran in front of her car and flagged her down. And of course, as you would on a deserted road in the dark in the middle of the night, she stopped and got out. And he tried to take her keys away from her because she turned the car off and took the keys with her when she stopped. And after a struggle for the keys, he pulled out a gun, leaned in and shot her children and shot at her. And then he ran away. So after she was treated at the hospital, she and her parents held a press conference. She had a wounded arm. They said they did it. They had the press conference to stop all the requests for interviews and to get help finding the shaggy-haired stranger. By the time of the press conference, her 2 children had been put in foster care because the red flags were waving. Her arm that was shot was bandaged, and it was, she was right-handed and it was her left arm. So there were rumors of holes in her story and the atmosphere was quite tense. She did not look well. When she was in her 20s, she looked like she was 60 years old. She looked very weathered. And you could see too much of the whites of her eyes all the time. It's the creepiest thing. I don't know if you can tell by looking at this picture, but she just was very odd. And if you could see her now on the internet, you can Google her and there's more updated pictures because she's quite a bit older. But I don't know if you can tell, you can see too much of the whites of her eyes. It's very strange. In Japan, there's a name for this, if you can believe it. It's yin sanpaku, and it means it's a sign of emotional instability and self-destructive behavior. They've got it going on. Male reporters went really easy on her. They were very sympathetic to this poor young mother. She described stopping, getting out of the car, struggling with the keys, him shooting the children, and then her. 7-year-old Cheryl, 8-year-old Christy, and 3-year-old Danny. Danny was paralyzed. Cheryl was killed. Christy was very severely injured. So this author, the author of the book about Anne Rule, I had to clear that up. There's so many Annes and so many authors. I'm starting to lose it here. Anne Jaeger, remember she's an investigative TV reporter? Okay, so she's interviewing Diane Downs. And she asked her where she got the towel to wrap up her arm. So her story is she got shot and then she just had a towel. And the author challenged her that the police thought she did it. So let me tell you what that conversation was like. It's getting really windy. I hope my power doesn't go out. Her vehement denial came like shotgun blasts. If I had shot my own children, she said, would I not have done a good job? Her speech pattern accelerated, becoming more staccato. Why would I then immediately have rushed them to the hospital with 2 children still living? Christy woke up, and as I say, she may be the only one to get me out of this. Would I have brought her to the hospital? Wouldn't she be the one I'd make sure was dead? Then cried crocodile tears. That's insane. To think I would do such a thing and then bring the witness in against me? That's crazy. So her story is a tissue of lies. She did not drive immediately to the hospital. They know that for a fact. Anyway, she had this interesting conversation with her, and her father, Diane Downs' father, lost it and kicked reporters out of this interview that was being done. The author was blamed by the other reporters for asking this very aggressive question. She told Downs' father that these were the questions that everybody had. You're going to hear these questions from everybody. Don't single me out. If you're a good reporter, you're going to ask these questions. He calmed down, and then this whole thing felt wrong. And Jaeger, the author of the Anne Rule book, got very obsessed with the story. Why did Diane wrap her own arm before she went and offered aid to her dying children? And Jaeger knew there's something about this towel that's going to be an important bit of evidence. And she mentioned it at the time, and it will prove to have been important. Chapter 15, this is called Night Terrors. The Downs case was big news. In February of 1984, she was arrested and charged with the crime of doing these shootings. The author, Jaeger, had put together a special. Elizabeth Diane Downs, in her own words, and she'd recorded it early on, but she sat on it. She was waiting to air it to find out, what was going to happen. Was she going to be charged or not? This drove Diane Downs' family crazy. Diane Downs' father wondered, what did Diane say to this reporter, and would it sink her at her trial? So she waited patiently after Diane was arrested. She waited to air it. The prosecution began to take an interest. What There's a reporter. They've got a personal interview, a one-on-one interview with our suspect. It got so weird that Jaeger had the tapes of the interview locked in a vault that belonged to the lawyer of her company. Down's father threatened Jaeger in the courtroom when the judge okayed the use of evidence that the defense had tried to prevent. They singled her out because she'd spoken up. Her dad got so angry in court that Doug Welch, the main investigator, physically had to stand between the father and the author to block his view of her, to break up his anger. This is Diane Down's father losing his you-know-what in court. Doug was an investigator, and he had more authority in the eyes of Diane Down's father. He had a gun on his hip. He had handcuffs. And the father backed down. And then Doug walked Jaeger to her car, and they became friends. In 2024, she talked to him about this. And reminiscing, a little bit memory lane. And he said, yeah, that was his style, the father's loss of temper. He needed a male to stand up and confront him because I think he always felt that he could pretty well dominate any situation, especially involving women. His wife was seldom present and never called on. She and Diane called each other sis, as in sister. This is her stepmother. Doug, the investigator, didn't remember the specifics of what prompted the dad's outburst, but did recall other outbursts. And many of them were directed at Doug. It was clear from early on that the dad did not like me. He didn't like any of the investigators, but there was something about me that really irritated the hell out of him. After one particular hearing, Doug said, I remember making eye contact with him and he just seethed. His whole face was red and he called me pond scum. Of course, a couple of other guys in the sheriff's department heard that and they teasingly nicknamed Doug, the investigator, pond scum for a while. But this anger was real and on display like a volcano, threatening much worse. So Doug knew as well as Jaeger that Down's daddy was a grenade ready to pull the pin in a heartbeat. I think what they're saying here is the apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. Okay. Then Down's brother sent Jaeger flowers and an apology. And she said this was very clearly manipulation. It ran in the family. She challenged the brother Paul on the phone. And what the hell are you doing? I'm an investigative reporter. Why are you, the brother of the suspect who's in jail, sending me flowers? It's so inappropriate. And he admitted that his father put him up to it. So Jaeger began to have nightmares about Diane Down's father and his hair-trigger temper and the awful details of the crime. And these nightmares haunted her for quite a while. One night, she was dreaming of rescuing the children by breaking the car window and actually, in real life, in the middle of her sleep, punched through her bedroom window in her sleep. It woke her up, and she thought somebody was breaking in to her house. And she ended up sleeping at a neighbor's. She was so freaked out. This is pretty serious stress. And it wasn't until the next day that she realized it wasn't anybody breaking in. It was her in her sleep. And it did end the nightmare, that particular kind of nightmare. Chapter 16, Stop the Presses. The documentary sat unaired for 6 months. The DA was worried that it would be sympathetic to Downs. He wanted to subpoena it. And he first asked the station, just nicely, please, thank you, let me have it. And the station had the Shield law, which protected reporters from police seizure. So it kept the tapes in its corporate lawyer's vault for fear the DA would break in and steal them. I mean, this is nuts. So until the early of 1984, the media coverage for Diane was sympathetic. This is a terrible story, kind of reminiscent of that other famous Mother of the Year, Suzanne Smith. So why was it empathetic? She hadn't been charged or arrested yet. She and her 3 children were shot. She was living with the death of her middle child. And the real nitty-gritty damning evidence the prosecutors were protecting for trial and hadn't come out into the open yet. People didn't really realize the case against her. The day of the documentary release, Downs' father wrote a letter of protest to the big shots at the station, the corporate heads. Amongst other complaints, he revealed his core problem with it. The final consideration in our request, like don't air it, is that the material might well impact my position with further consideration for advancement within the post office. So here we go. What did I say? The apple doesn't fall very far from the tree. Quintessentially narcissistic. I'm really upset about this documentary about my daughter killing her own children because I might not get my promotion at work. The documentary starts, and you can watch this on YouTube. I watched it again the other night. I'd seen it before, and it is unreal. It starts with him admitting that he doubted Diane's version of the crime since day one. So the station waited until jury selection was over before they aired that, which the author says is an antiquated ethical choice. Chapter 17, Downs Changing Stories. Jaeger goes into detail about the forensic evidence that proved Diane's first story wrong. And I'm not going to go into it. It belabors the evidence, red blood droplets, what happened first, angles of shots, types of injuries. A couple of the facts. The .22 that she used was kept in the back of her car, the trunk of the car, with the towel. She came prepared with the gun and the towel. When she took the gun out, she had the towel for her own injury. Downs had used it to threaten herself. I'm going to do it in the past, and she fired it at her ex-husband in Arizona. Big mistake. But her story changed. I'll tell you why in a minute. Her story changed. At first, it was one guy, bushy-haired stranger. Then it was 2 guys. And then the sheriff said, oh, she must know who did it. And pushed her and pushed her and pushed her. You must have known who did it. And she stormed out of that interview. Because Jaeger had a great source, she was able to fact check enough ahead of time to be sure that the documentary was accurate. It revealed so much new about the case, especially about Diane's personality in action on screen. And it is wild. Half an hour part of it is the interview with Diane. It is wild. You have to watch it. Jaeger used her sources, inside information, corroborated it, waited until it was likely that the arrest was coming, and then interviewed Diane. And Downs was, before Downs was arrested, before she went to jail and got out of reach. It was a fabulous exclusive. It really made her career, this reporter, and really interesting. Chapter 18, Killer Interview. In the fall of '83, she asked Downs to talk. She said, please, join me. This is before she's arrested. Join me. Bring your lawyer if you want. I'm fine with that. Jaeger suspected that her lawyer would tell her, no, don't go talk to this reporter. But Downs was a loose cannon. She showed up disheveled in ripped nylons. Remember nylons? In ripped nylons, with a thrown together outfit that she obviously had been out partying the night before. She was always hanging out at this local singles bar. And pregnant. And obviously hungover. She'd been drinking. She often slept in her car when she was fighting with her parents. She'd been staying with her parents since the shooting. She speculated that she got pregnant. Jaeger, the author, speculated that Downs got pregnant, thinking, oh, they'll never arrest a pregnant woman. And if they arrest me, the jury would never convict me. And she seemed very pleased at the attention of being interviewed. Jaeger said it was the strangest interview of her life. She said that Downs admitted that on October 13th, she on purpose got pregnant and kept his identity secret. She said she got pregnant because she missed her kids. Oh, I remember this part of this interview was just nuts. She says, I got pregnant because I miss Christy and I miss Danny and I miss Cheryl so much. I'm never going to see Cheryl on earth again. And you can't replace kids, but you can replace the effect they give you. And they give me love and they give me satisfaction. They give me stability. They give me a reason to live and a reason to be happy. And that's gone. They took it from me. But children are so easy to conceive. It's all about what they gave her and not vice versa. When the documentary was aired, Jaeger was able to break new evidence from her source, including telling Downs about the discovery that there was high velocity blood spatter outside the car. She said the kids were shot inside the car. But, they typed the blood. They knew whose blood it was. She claimed it was planted. She claimed it was blood dripping when the children were carried out. But as we all know now, they can tell from the shape and direction of blood drops, how far away, how fast, what angle, et cetera, et cetera. Like Anne, Jaeger had trained herself how to be analytical, be a critical thinker when dealing with really emotional cases. Anne Rule never let it make her jaded or unable to connect with the humanity of the people involved. Giving the evidence, Downs' story was fantasy. Physics bore that out. Cheryl tried to escape the car and was shot from inside the car downward as she was lying on the gravel. Forensics would prove that that's what really happened. And in this interview, Diane talked a lot about her life and men, especially her ex-husband. He owned a .22, and it was kept in her trunks, but it was never found. Downs admitted that she had stolen the .22 from her ex to use it on herself. She said, I fired it to scare the hell out of him when she shot at him. Witnesses testified that her children went around the neighborhood, barely dressed, begging for food, before this incident. Cops went to their trailer in Arizona, and they found the bullet she'd shot at her ex-husband. It was too damaged to be of use, but later in their Oregon apartment, they did find bullets that had been in that gun, and they matched the tool marks on the bullets from the crime scene. Diane was still delivering mail at this point. She was a mail carrier. That should give you all kinds of confidence. She was still delivering mail as this investigation was going on. This is before she was arrested. And then she says, in this interview, she says, everyone says to me, you sure were lucky. Well, I don't feel very lucky. I couldn't tie my damn shoes for about 2 months. It is very painful. It's still painful. I have a steel plate in my arm. She continued, focusing on her wounds instead of the bullet holes which shredded her children. Quote, the scar is going to be there forever. I'm going to remember that night for the rest of my life, whether I want to or not, because of the scar in her arm. I don't think I was very lucky. I think my kids were lucky. If I had been shot the way they were, we all would have died, except maybe Danny. So these particular remarks freaked Jaeger out. She's the interviewer, the one who wrote the book. Totally freaked her out. She knew she was talking to a child killer. I mean, that was the moment when she realized, oh my God, this is a monster. It was a visceral reaction. She remembers 3 things from the trial. The towel was ready and folded in a perfect way to press over her wound before they left home that night, waiting with the gun. It's proven that Downs did not have keys in her hand for the guy to grab. And the way that they proved it is very interesting. Diane claimed that when this attack was going on, inside the car, she could hear the radio playing Hungry Like the Wolf. It was not a radio, it was a tape playing Hungry Like the Wolf. As she was being shot, she heard that song playing inside the car. But the reality is, if she got out of the car and took the keys, the car would have had to have been turned off. And the tape could not play unless the keys were in the ignition. And the third thing from this interview was knowing Cheryl's testimony. She went on the witness stand, this little girl, and the prosecutor said to her, do you know who shot Cheryl? This is, I wrote Cheryl's testimony. I'm wrong. It's Christy's testimony about Cheryl's death. He says to her, do you know who shot Cheryl? And the little girl says, yes. He says, who did it? And she says, my mom. And he says, how do you know that? And she says, I watched. He asks, were there any strangers there? Anybody you didn't know? No. How about with Danny? Was there any stranger there when Danny was shot? Little girl says, no. Prosecutor asked, who shot him? Christy says, my mom. Prosecutor asked, who shot you? And she says, my mom. And he says, do you know that because you saw her do it? And she says, yeah. Downs' description of the race to the hospital haunts Jaeger, and especially Downs' smirk. She has this smirk that's referred to by experts as duper's delight. Duper, who fools other people. Duper's delight is this sort of permanent smirk that many psychopaths seem to have. It almost seems like a trait. Go back and look at pictures on the internet of famous weirdos, and you'll see what that's about. So I'm going to stop here because it's the end of the chapter. And it's a lot to digest. It's an ugly, ugly story. So next we'll start video number 3. And I hope that you're happy with the choice of this book. It's a little different, but I just loved Anne Rule so much. Now, I didn't expect to get so much into the crime aspect of it. But it's fascinating. It's really interesting. So I hope you enjoyed it, and let me know. Thank you very much for watching this, and Slongafoil. Sláinte.